All right, cool. Thank you all so much again. Thank you for bearing with us. A little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning, but we are getting started now. So, yeah, hey everyone, welcome to the Philadelphia IGDA meeting for April 2022. I am Adrian Sandoval. I am the chair of the Philadelphia chapter for the International Game Developers Association. We're a global organization that's dedicated to the enrichment and advocacy of game developers around the world. Here in Philadelphia, our chapter is dedicated to supporting our fast-growing professional network, as well as our very, very active indie and academic communities as well. If you'd like more information about the IGDA, please head over to igda.org. Consider becoming a member for various benefits, including an invite to the official IGDA Discord server, which gives you instant access to a professional network of developers from around the world. Here in Philadelphia, we hold these monthly events on the second Tuesday of every month. Please be sure to follow us. We are on various social media, Facebook, Twitter. Please check out our website at philly.igda.org. You can keep up to date all of our events as they happen. You can also be sure to check out our YouTube channel to see recordings of previous meetings in the near future. So please consider subscribing to that as well. If you're not able to make regular monthly meetings, you might be able to catch them later on the YouTube channel. We also have a Discord that you can reach out to us if you would like to join that and talk to us as well as other members of the very vibrant community that we have here in Philadelphia. That Philly IGDA Discord is free access to everyone, regardless of your IGDA membership status. So please just let us know if you would like a link to that. Also note that we do have a code of conduct. You can read our code of conduct in full at that website, again, philly.igda.org. But in short, please keep in mind that all of our events and our communities are meant to be safe, inclusive spaces. Please respect everybody in your communication with them, and all of our events, whether we're hosting them online such as this, our online spaces such as our Discord server, as well as the chat here as well. Also, really quickly, I just want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A, question and answers button down below. If you have any questions for our guests tonight, you can populate them there. We will be sure to get to those at the Q&A portion, but you can actually queue up questions in the question and answer portion. You have that ability on this Zoom webinar at the bottom of the screen. So yeah, with that, let me move it over to our guest for the night. Tonight, we are welcoming Grant Andrew Ervin, veteran to the game industry, as well as the Philadelphia development scene. He's worked many different jobs from QA to game design. He's currently working as a game designer for PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds Madison. I'm going to actually let Grant take over now, and he can tell you a little bit more about himself as well as his background. Go ahead, Grant.
Good evening. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Robert, for inviting me tonight. I'll start with a correction. Unfortunately, I do not work on PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. I work on PUBG Battlegrounds. It's a very important distinction. They did a rebranding last year, so it's not PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. It's PUBG Battlegrounds, and yes, Battlegrounds is being used twice in that. Very fun. And also, thank you for calling me a veteran. I'll check my age again. That's definitely, it's wild that, more than 5 years in the industry gets you that honorary at this point. But, my experience has definitely been that, it's definitely a while. It feels much longer than it actually probably has been. But yeah, tonight I want to talk about game design. I want to talk about game development. I want to talk about, going from maybe a different starting position in the industry into game design. I actually started as QA and a game tester 5 years ago, and kind of worked my way up into, QA analyst, design QA, and then kind of being a full-blown game designer professionally. But and also, I'm going to kind of clip through the slideshow as much as possible, so there's plenty of time for Q&A. But yeah, I've got a lot to show tonight, so we're going to kind of go at a quick beat. So here is slides. Does everyone see slides? Is there a meme in front of everyone? I get a thumbs up or a confirmation.
Yep, it's
excellent. There. Awesome. Okay, so game development. What a thing. What a picture. So, game development, I ideally kind of looks like this factory, right? You have prototyping, you have development, you have QA, and then you have a release. You release the product and it's done, you finish. Production kind of houses all of that stuff and kind of keeps everything together. But really it looks a little more like this. And frankly, every other department is kind of all over the place as well in this process. It's just constant back and forth, and iteration. And even when a thing is released out into the wild, that iteration continues, that collaboration continues. Each department is just as equally necessary and important as the other. That's extremely the sooner you realize that in the industry, the easier you're going to have, the easier time you're going to have, basically working with other people, working on projects, and just continuing to work in the industry. Just realizing how equally important pretty much every pillar of it is. The machine can't work unless every cog is polished and clicks together with everything else. As a designer, I've been a full-time professional game designer at PUBG for a little over 7 months now, 6 to 7 months. Up until that point, I had been working in QA full-time at different places like Epic, lots of different smaller studios. This really excellent therapy game that was a lot of effort, and I know Adrian kind of helped out on that. So I've been able to see just a lot of different corners of the work, and while all of that was going on, I was working on my own stuff on the side. So, being involved in game jams, making 2 to 3 projects a year that I could say, I put this together, I stood it up, and here it is. Those are all really important things. If I hadn't done that, if I, for example, last year, I'm going to show kind of a couple of the projects that I worked on last year. If those didn't exist, I wouldn't have the job I do now. Period. That's just facts. It's extremely important, just as much as what you do on the job, where you're at, is, what you do off the job is just as important, especially if you have a place to go, a place you want to be, and have that kind of locked on. That's extremely important. So, speaking of memes, here is a academic paper from I believe it's from possibly one of the institutes in Chicago, but basically game design as feedback. So you have mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. How does it look? Mechanics being, how does it feel? What are the systems and rules, or what are the rules? Dynamics being the systems at play. How do those rules actually interact with other rules and other players and other actors in the space, in the play. And then the aesthetics is like, how does this feel? How is this fun? Not necessarily visual aesthetics, but like, what kind of fun is this? Is it stealth fun? Is it tactical fun? Is it just guns blazing fun? That's what we kind of mean by aesthetics. And the idea of it all being kind of a feedback. So just kind of like a thermometer, a thermometer is going to read the temperature of a room. It's going to say it's either too hot or too cold, you're just right. And then that flow will go back into the room. The air will go back into that room and adjust everything, and the cycle continues. Just kind of like a Monopoly board. You have that constant flow and that constant change of material and systems and player choices, and all that stuff is just kind of flowing together. There's basically I heard a very nice saying recently, and I think it's very true. There are kind of 2 kinds of game designers. There are storytellers, and there are the mathematicians, the system focused, mechanics focused, numbers driven, balance driven kind of game designer. And then there is the storyteller, who is much more interested in thematics, aesthetics, all those things. And really, you want to have, as someone who is multidisciplinary, and working just in the real world in a in a game studio on a game, you really need a sense of both. But of course, you're going to lean one way or the other just depending on how you feel, what you're interested in. But matter no matter what you kind of choose, ultimately the process is kind of smoke and mirrors. The game you're making, what the player sees is not what's actually happening. You know, it's slowly kind of getting to the point with the game engines nowadays where it is a bit more literal, right? Like you're not having to fake things as often as you maybe would have 10, 15, 20 years ago. But the art and the art of making games is always going to be an illusion, right? It's very much, there's always going to be a suspension of disbelief. Even when VR becomes, you can feel the kickback in your chest and you can, get goosebumps, and every sensory element is kind of there in some, faraway VR experience. It's still an illusion. You still need to kind of convince people that what they're seeing and what they're feeling is actually happening, or make them believe it for a little bit. Kind of leading to that, a big part of what I do is kind of not necessarily at PUBG, but in my spare time, is level design. And if you go to a site like NoClip, which is an awesome resource, they have a ton of video games from the N64 era, all the way up to Xbox 360, PS3. So you can see stuff like, you basically get to see the guts of all these really classic, fundamental level designs. And you really get a sense that like these guys were basically putting on an opera inside of a cardboard box. I mean, they were really working with very limited resources, and our resources have kind of, in the AAA space, resources are kind of infinite, right? It's only a matter of like manpower to some extent, but working within the confines of whatever you create for yourself usually is for the best. But these guys had a ton of constraints and made some absolute bangers. I currently work on PUBG. I work directly with the game development team. I'm in the game development team, in the in-game team. We work on stuff like new weapons, new items, new mechanics. We've been spending a lot of time working on a new map called Kiki. And there's a lot of awesome some cool slides that these are a couple of sneak peeks that they've kind of released recently for the map. Release date is still TBD publicly, and it's just something that we're pouring a lot of heart and soul in as the kind of American like PUBG team. We're making this like kind of Southland map that's just like expansive, and has like all these sort of different biomes. There's kind of desert, there's swamp, there's this massive downtown space, and it's really nothing. I mean, there's nothing like it in any multiplayer game. The amount of variety and just the amount of variety of experiences that we're kind of packing into this thing is pretty excellent. But if you aren't familiar with PUBG, it was the grandfather of the battle royale genre. It's still extremely popular. We just went free to play. So we have a ton of players, which is awesome. But this is kind of what's some of PUBG's kind of like. Crazy. I mean, I think some people get the impression that it's like a walking simulator, or just very boring. But there's actually just a ton of amazing emergent gameplay that comes out of it. I wonder if I can. So here's some of the highlights from this past year of the game, of players streaming the game. So what makes PUBG kind of special is that there is a very fine balance between, realism and fun and competitiveness and exploration and immersion and all these things that you really don't get pretty much in any other battle royale. You know, there is so much stylization in pretty much every Fortnite, Apex, Warzone. There's so much stylization that this really, for whatever reason, has still remained a very unique experience, even after, it just celebrated its 5th anniversary last month or this past month. Uh, it's still extremely unique, and you're really not going to get a video game experience quite like it anywhere else. Uh, and it's been a like I've been working on the game for almost 2 years now, uh, and that's been really awesome. But um, yeah, let me click, and I'll be answering any sort of questions. Save your questions for the end. We're gonna get to it very soon, and I'll answer any questions you guys have. But one of the reasons why I'm a game designer is because I started this kind of separate solo label called Honeycomb Interactive. I started this when I was in the Philadelphia game development scene back in 2014. Dropped out of college, uh, basically working in a mailroom, really awful, uh, and doing this on the side way back. And I got involved with the Philly game Philly game devs, Philly game mechanics, and back then it was called the Knights, Philly Game Knights. But and that was awesome. That was really the start of my career. Almost was just getting involved with that community for a couple years and working with people, game jams, all that stuff. Really was the root of my entire kind of thread in this industry. And it started with this. It started with Honeycomb. I kind of foolishly kind of set out to make something and release it. My first, I got investment, and I was like, all right, we're gonna do this real quick and easy. And literally, the thing that I started the studio to make never got published. It's still an unreleased thing for multiple reasons, but most of them being because I didn't finish it and I moved on to other stuff that I could finish at the time. But going from that, I went from making small video games to making board games. I made board games for a couple years, all while working in QA basically. But then I actually transitioned back from board games into full-blown video games and working with Unreal Engine. I started working at Epic on the engine in the QA team, and just kind of absorbing as much tactical knowledge as I could during the day, and then applying it at night was quite something. Very tiring, but it was huge. Just a huge step up for me as a game developer. So one of the prototypes that I worked on over the past couple years is this sci-fi cooking game. So you actually there's a procedural mesh generation, so you can basically chop up these fruits and veggies, these alien fruits and veggies, and the whole vibe is kind of Blade Runner-y, cyberpunk. That's a very early prototype that's still kind of in the storeroom right now. I kind of put that back on the shelf for the time being, but this was one of my early kind of Unreal Engine prototype experiments, and going very holistically. Audio, lighting, gameplay, the level design itself. That was all done by me, and from the start, wanting to kind of get good at all those things at once, which is challenging, and I don't recommend it. Try to get good at one thing and then move on to the next thing. Don't rush into trying to create everything at once, right? How do I get over here? So one of the next big kind of jumps for me, and this was actually last year around this time, I released a small kind of open world horror game, basically a 10 to 15 minute demo. And this is the trailer that I made for it. This is in UE4, and I've since then kind of upgraded to UE5, but using as much like stylization and kind of working with pacing, very little combat, really just trying to focus on, bad vibes, so this is the trailer for that. So we've got, portals, we've got a whole inventory system. There's creatures in this world. It feels living and breathing, and there's enemies to kind of avoid or combat. So this is something that I'm still kind of working on, but the finished thing should be finished by the end of this year. Might not make it to that summer date that I put last year, but again, just using as many tricks of the trade as I could into one experience, after kind of learning and taking that, kind of carrying that forward. Here's some stills. So this project actually has this whole open world. This was made with the UE4 landscape tool, hand sculpted, all that stuff. So I kind of initially took the islands as a kind of base and then started to make gameplay around it, and then went back and kind of edited the islands again, make gameplay around that, and kind of back and forth. That was kind of the iteration process. To the right here, you can see some material tests and post-processing tests that I did before kind of getting too wild. But these are kind of early stages stuff that I think anyone can kind of start with, is create a base landscape, create a world, and use post-processing to kind of make that world feel alive and feel like a place and have like some potency. Another great thing about going grayscale, if anyone is interested in that, you can very much mix and match assets to, you mix and match asset packs in color, you're going to start to see a lot of discrepancies, especially if they're coming from different sources, or, just it's a lot to make sense together. But when it's black and white, for whatever reason, a lot of that just kind of works, unless they're so stylistically different, then it's just like, wouldn't work anyways. But the black and white really does help a lot with just consistency and getting something, that feels like it belongs together. It's really a great trick. Here's some other spaces. So we have this lighthouse. The lighthouse was made by like, animating the centerpiece and then sticking like literally the same like light asset that I used for the flashlight in the game. I just blew it up, stuck 2 on each side of the thing as it rotates, and that's how you make a lighthouse. That stuff like that, very like resource, just being very resourceful helps a lot, I think. And this is actually inside the same lighthouse here. So this is the interior to the right. That's the interior of this lighthouse. So you walk up to that TV and turn it off, and you walk a little bit forward, and there's a knock at the door. You go up to the knock, and the door, and it's locked. You walk back away, it knocks again. Just kind of very like slow burn horror is kind of laced throughout this entire space. And you're kind of just navigating your way through all of that. And this is another project. This is actually a hackathon that I did, Game Jam hackathon project, done in basically one weekend for PUBG. It was a PUBG hackathon, and I got to work with some awesome coworkers. But I kind of spearheaded the development and the design and all that stuff, all the in-game implementation. I handled all that stuff. But I had a coworker that, I was like, you do the 2D art, just do kick ass at it. We had one of the UI designers do an awesome like UI pass, and then we had an engineer to kind of back up some, just base stuff. But I was doing basically doing all the in-game implementation for everything you see, combat, animation, the levels, the flow of everything, the audio, all that stuff. I kind of just shouldered for 4 days. Um, and here's the trailer for that. So we have 3 levels here. There's a daytime kind of desert zip line. There's a nighttime desert zip line and a dungeon. And this is a 4-player co-op game called Couch Goblins, and it can be done 1 to 4 players. It's also cooperative or competitive, so you can like hit the other goblin if you want. Each goblin has like a health pool and can respawn. This is the extremely floaty jump mechanic that is not good, but it was good enough for the hackathon project. Which is always a big, if I were to go back into this project, that would be probably the first thing I would attempt to fix, is just kind of getting the gameplay feel a little better, a little less floaty. You fall on those spikes, you'll die. There's the kind of like lava pools that you can touch and they'll damage you. These zip lines were, kind of pretty easy to like set up and kind of just maintain. And so if you notice the dragons in the back, during the night level, they're actually doing like completely different stuff, and they look also different too. They actually kind of glow, and they're all sleeping. So those little touches for the night level. The night level kind of makes a little bit of a difference. This is the dungeon level, so this is stylistically a little different in gameplay. That other one was left to right, and this is actually top down. And again, this is actually UE5. This is using global illumination. It's using lumen. It's using ray tracing, the lumen ray tracing. And it looks great. I mean, there's very little manual lights I had to place in this level at all. A lot of the lighting is actually just coming from the fire and from the emissive materials on everything. So that glow is actually coming from the emissive material on the axes. The glow from that's actually coming from the flames. Same with these spikes. It was really cool to experiment with that. And you can't really see it in this video, but if you were to like pan the camera up, you just get this crazy, diorama of color, almost like a church, like stained glass, because there's so much natural ambient light getting emitted and kind of getting pushed up into the space. Really cool. I forgot to add that to the slides, but trust me, it's very cool. The lumen and the global illumination stuff in UE5 is just like very performative, very easy to set up, and you just you turn it on and kind of forget about it and just see the results, which is not a very common thing in a game engine. But some more of this stuff, and we'll just keep going a little bit. Some other extra levels I kind of made, totally kind of different tangential kind of design. This was more of a arena style map, so the record that's playing gets smaller and smaller, and then it'll get bigger and bigger. And the outer area of the record will do damage to the player. So 4 players kind of fighting on the space is pretty fun. And again, that platform is going to shrink and kind of grow as the match goes. But thematically, I thought it was a pretty cool idea. The idea of these little guys kind of fighting on a record player or on a pizza box or something where scale is really important. And also kind of mixing like college dorm room aesthetic with like Wizards library was also kind of a thing I was kind of experimenting with. Here's another one. This is a garlic night. So you get chased by these, really delicious ingredients on a pizza, and the pepperoni are kind of functional jump pads. It's that's whatever. But this was really fun to work on. Again, UE5, so lighting is really crisp. These were all kind of work in progress materials, textures and stuff. But um, it's funny. It does what you want it to do, which is the garlic with legs walking and chasing you. And sometimes at the end of the day, if it's not perfect, if it does what you want to do, that's usually enough. And finally, this is kind of the reason I got my job in a lot of ways. So I'll talk a little bit more about this than maybe the other two projects. Um, Last year, around the end of September, I thought to myself, what if I made a Halloween game and release it before Halloween? That was a terrible idea. Don't ever do that unless you mean to do it for the next year's Halloween, because it's just a ton of work, right? But I was like, I could probably make a small open world action RPG in less than 30 days. I told myself this, and actually I did it, which is kind of the insane thing. Uh, Very much like did not sleep at all during October. Very much stressful, bad decision, but it it worked out. And here's the trailer for it. But this is UE5. You're gonna see some good lighting, some cool stuff. But yeah, this is basically, I showed this to my some of the leads at my studio, and they're like, "Wow!" So that was kind of the start of that ball rolling.
Um, Real quick, Grant, I think we lost your audio after the video is played.
It's because I was muted. Excellent. Thank you. Um, yeah, so that was a Spellslinger's Trick or Treat demo. That released October 27th or 26th. Um, just kind of right under the like Halloween week window. I put out an update kind of like a couple days after that to fix a couple of hot bugs. But it's basically, I have some photos. Here's some stills. But I basically did everything on the project, but like minus some of the asset creation. Although I did do a lot of custom kind of asset and like art creation for it. But basically, it was I kind of call it open world in a bottle, where um, here's a kind of top-down view of it actually. So the starting area was kind of like down here in this graveyard. So we have kind of two graveyards here. This kind of central village with this tower, this kind of Pumpkin King's tower in the middle. Very very Disneyland-esque. Inside of this tower is kind of three tiers of dungeons, and then the throne room is inside at the very top. And then this kind of big swampy area that kind of slowly kind of consumes like that back half portion of the map, along with two witch houses, and actually in the middle here is a kind of like troll bridge kind of that kind of uh, leads out to the distance. But a huge challenge was making this feel like a big open world, even though it was only kind of one by one almost. If it was a PUBG map, this would be the size of like our smallest map in PUBG. But using everything that just out of the box in UE5, landscape tool, foliage tool, landscape painting, you know, all the lighting I kind of did custom. And you can kind of see uh, these candy corns. You actually collect the candy corns to unlock doors. The tower itself was like a central gameplay element. So each rung of this tower required a certain amount of candy corn to be collected. So you have to go around the map, collect the corn, come back, clear that level. You get some nice loot at the end of it. That level of the tower, walk back out, you get teleported out, collect more candy corn, hit that second tier, do the same thing, hit that third tier. So it was a very tricky balancing like how much candy corn to put on the map, what's the player's progression like, what's the difficulty kind of ramp up like. um, but it's been really awesome seeing people react to it. They got a lot of positive feedback when it released. I got a chance to see someone play it on Twitch, which was really cool. And they were able to beat it in like basically like an hour, which is awesome. That was exactly kind of what I was going for. um, but it's you can see this is kind of like a wireframe of that central town area. um, and we had a full equipment and item screen, so I did all the illustrations for this. So this is all the loot in the game, which is kind of crazy. You can kind of mix and match all these armor pieces. These are kind of the consumables, so they all kind of do different buffs. um, and then we had like accessories, so you could wear like 5 rings and a necklace and whatever. um, very fun set of tools to kind of work with in that toy box. um, but yeah, so I've been working full time as a game designer on a lot of stuff, not just PUBG, just a lot of crazy stuff, um, since basically November. And this is pretty pretty good summation of my mood and mental state. It is both of these all the time, uh, and everyone I work with is basically. I mean, everyone I've ever worked with in the industry, this is basically the mood. Things are good. Sometimes they're less good, but uh, it's crazy. It's all kind of magical that we're all even working on what we're working on. It's very fortunate. Um, and there's wins, there's losses, there are all sorts of in betweens, and always gray area, right? When you're working on a game, there's always an unknown. Um, if you're not comfortable with uncertainty, it's not necessarily a great line of work. if you want certainty, there's a lot of other jobs that provide that. Um, and there's a lot of other jobs that won't work you into the dirt. Not saying I do that in my job, but when I was a QA at other places, not going to name names, but we're talking 60 hours a week for like months on end, right? That's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. It can over time kind of feel like you're in a trench, right? It's QA is really just like the trenches of game development, and that is the same everywhere. That's it. That's a consistency. Is that it's a lot of work. And then as you change departments, guess what? That consistency continues. It continues to be a lot of work, even when you're working on exactly what you want to be doing. I'm working exactly on what I want to be doing right now. It's still a lot of work. It's still work, you know. Um, and that's been something to kind of grapple with, right? So on top of working remotely and all this stuff, I'm actually returning. I'm going to be working in I've worked in the industry for 5 years, and I'm going to be working at an actual proper game studio building next month for the first time. That's wild, absolutely wild. It's been a crazy time, but the pandemic I think kind of opened up a lot of things. Uh, there's more diversity in North American game development professionally than there ever has been, and that's almost exclusively because of the pandemic remote work situation. They had to go to other places to find they not that they had to, but they opened their nets much wider. And I wouldn't be working at PUBG if things had remained the same dogmatic, you know, geographically locked in setup that we had for the past 30 years. the past 2 years completely, I think, blew the doors wide open for a lot of people. Um, and it's unfortunate that maybe some of that might be changing, but I think at the end of the day, that's going to carry on with a lot of these companies. So, if you are applying from Alabama for a company in California, you probably have a better chance of getting that job now than you did in 2019, right? Um, so that's something to think about. There's a lot more opportunity, and there's a lot more uh, availability, I think. That's all the slides I got. That's it. So I'm here for Q&A. If anyone's got questions, yeah, we can open that up. I actually have probably about 20 minutes available for Q&A if that's okay. But thank you so much for letting me blab and all that. So I'll return the podium back.
Applause happening in the chat. Yeah, thank you so much, Grant. Yeah, so just again a reminder, we do have Jason has gotten us started with the Q&A. So but really quickly before we grow there, just a quick reminder to everybody, we do have that Q&A button down at the bottom if you want to start queuing up questions. We got about 20 minutes for Q&A, so start thinking of some questions or start typing them out now. I'm going to start with what Jason has posted here in the Q&A. You've done a lot of work with Unreal over the past few years, and you've obviously taken it to it really well. How long did it take you to acclimate to Unreal early on? And were you using blueprints for everything? Are you like C++ in there?
I'm still using blueprints exclusively. I'm
Oh,
not an
wow.
engineer, not an engineer at all. So not even in the remote slightest way. So, but blueprints and Unreal Engine lets you do that. It lets you not have to be an engineer to make something really cool. Because of the blueprint system, because they take cues from a lot of other creative software. So you're able to kind of bring in past knowledge with kind of how some of this stuff works. Not to say there isn't a steep learning curve with those blueprints, but you're able to make things much faster. You're able to test them. You're able to iterate on them so much faster than if you were just coding. It's night and day, I think. Um, Getting a hang of it, that's a little tricky to kind of cleanly answer because I was, for several months working, 10 hours a day in the engine, um, making sure it worked. And actually at that job, I was actually on a team that was part of the fundamental foundation crew. So we were making sure specifically that gameplay blueprints, animation, audio, networking, level design. I was very fortunate to be on that team. I asked to be on that team, but I was fortunate to be given that you know opportunity, and that's how I learned the meat and potatoes. I don't think you get that experience without being in the trenches of a game engine for that long. Uh, that's a different experience than watching like 5 hours of YouTube a day, right? Totally viable way to do it, and most people have to do it that way. And I don't know if I'd recommend the other way, honestly. But that's been that's definitely been the learning curve, is just starting with small stuff, start with, and even starting with like other projects, start with projects from the marketplace, tweak those and make those your own in certain ways. That's been a really great way to learn for me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just curious really quick. Another question came in. I'm just gonna ask. So you did the Halloween game in an early version of Unreal 5, Engine 5, you said, right?
Yeah,
Curious
yeah.
if the blueprints experience is any different for UE5 versus UE4 at all.
It is almost identical, right? So UE5, I think, from just a face value compared to UE4, they basically just kind of changed the window dressing around
Hmm.
the UI. The guts of it are very much the same. Things are streamlined and things are a little more functional, but ultimately, if you're transitioning from UE4 to UE5, you're basically just learning a new front end UI. Everything underneath the first layer, and I mean like almost everything under that first layer of interaction, whether you're saving a level or whatever, it's the same stuff that was in UE4. So that's made it a very easy transition for me. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, I think it's just a little more usable. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. That's definitely professional curiosity. I use, like many others in Philly, Unity primarily, but I have dabbled with Blueprints a little bit. So I was curious about that. Mark asks, how did you end up finding or getting your first QA job in the industry?
So that kind of comes back to the root of my career in the Philly scene. I was at the Philly Dev Nights on a very regular basis, um, and I was able to meet a lot of awesome, adult game devs, right? One of them was a guy, Chris Hoops, who pretty sure is still in the area. Um, I know Adrian, you've probably worked with him a little bit,
A little bit.
and great guy. He gave me kind of the first foot in the door with BioStream, which is the project where we basically worked on a therapy game for kids on the autism spectrum. That was my first foot in the door on a full-time game. Basically, was being the sole QA person for that project, and that was quite an experience. But that's kind of how I got my foot in the door, was getting that community interaction, leading to I'd been teaching 3D animation at a school in Wilmington for a little bit at that time. I actually invited him and his partner in crime in the game development scene to come give a lecture. So that was kind of the first, like, hey, why don't you come over here and talk to these guys? And that was kind of the first real interactions outside of the dev night stuff. Um, I think that was probably a major part of it. So yeah, that Chris definitely gave me my first swing at the bat, and I went from there right to Epic basically after a couple years.
Nice. Yeah, and I think this kind of connects to the next question from Matthew here, which is, as someone who has no experience developing games, I'm not sure where to start. What advice would you give? I'm interested in the programming side of it.
Uh, I would say definitely, if you're more focused on the programming side, I would still say, like, look at something like itch.io, where you have the opportunity to get involved with game jams remotely. They have You go to itch.io, there's probably 100 different game jams going on right now. And you can actually see a huge calendar of them on their website. I would say get involved like that. Get into a Discord group. Find some collaborators. If you're interested in how to program, uh, I'm not sure, because I haven't. That's not a step I've even taken, because I work in blueprints. If you're interested in blueprints, then check out the UE blueprint stuff, because it's that. I mean, basically seeing what someone does on YouTube, making it, emulating it, doing it better, or making it fit with the project you're working on, and then doing that 150 times over is basically like the way to go. You know,
Yeah, they said in
and
chat, oh, go ahead, that they do have some programming experience.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
well, excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say is start. I mean, Unity and Unreal at this point have excellent, like, learning projects. Like, very, very, very good. I would say Unity has even better projects for the programming side of things, to learn their process. Like, really, really good. And their documentation, like Unity's documentation, blows Unreal's documentation out of the freaking water. Like, absolutely. So that's probably even a better place to start. Start with Unity. Start with some of their really awesome, like, starter projects. Their learning kit projects, and you'll be able to pick up a lot of stuff, I think. And then move on to the game jam stuff.
game jams, make stuff. That's pretty much it. Make stuff and start building your portfolio and getting to know people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really behavioral too. The behavioral practice of doing something, learning from it, and continuing to do it, uh, is super important. You know.
So we have any other questions queued up? Again, reminder, folks, please queue up questions if you have any questions for Grant. Rob, I'm gonna pass over to you really quickly. I know you usually have some questions lined up and you're not able to use the Q&A. So Rob, do you have any questions at all?
Here I am. Hey, this is a really cool talk to see sort of the span of stuff And I got to say, the thing that sort of impresses me, that I mean, I know you've gone through a bunch of different phases of what you're doing, but let me, you talked about long stretches of 60-hour work weeks and QA and all this kind of stuff, but you produced a lot of projects on your own.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest challenges right now. I've got a job that sort of eats up my life. I love so much of it, but it is also, you've got to find a balance, right? Personal projects. How do you find balance for that? Have there been times when you've given up on trying to do personal work? And then how did you get back to it? That's really like the tricky part, right? You lose the habit. So I kind of want to, I want to hear more about how you've balanced that or not been able to balance that in your time.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks, Rob. You know, I'm very much, you know, uh I work in phases, you know. So I'll be very I will put myself to the grindstone 3 to 4 months out of the year and then just be okay with not, right? Be okay with just doing enough, focusing on, you know, I right now I'm part of a very I guess you could say Herculean effort on this map. I'm in charge of a lot of very important things. Uh and it's going you know, it's and there is an end in sight, and you know, I have not done a lot of personal projects over the past 3 months, let's say. um and you know, for me also, because I'm now doing the stuff 9 to 5 that I was doing on the side to get to the point where I'm doing this 9 to 5, uh to kind of avoid that catch 22, I've actually kind of shifted focus a little bit to what my side projects are in a way. So I've actually started to work on like a Twitch channel, and I have a little VTuber guy. He's like a little frog, and he talks. And you know, this past week, my kind of side project was like giving him hats that like you can spend points, and he'll put on a hat. You know, that's that's like what hobbies should be, right? That's what personal projects should be. But if you're on a mountain and climbing it, that doesn't always cut, that doesn't always cut the biscuit, you know, because you want whatever you're working on to be able to say like, hey, I made this, check this out. um and that's being okay with just like, like Steven Spielberg. He's very famous for, doing like, he'll do a couple movies back to back. He'll just work real hard, like 2 or 3 movies back production, and just not do anything for like 2 years, right? That's the way he works. um Everyone eventually figures out the way they work. Sometimes, you know, you also have to be very careful with saying like, this thing that I'm making right now is going to be a finished product, and b, uh, I can turn it to capital. I can make money off of this if I just do it right. And that's not the case. So I think being able to get out of the construct of every hobby I do needs to make me money, even though I was just talking about a Twitch channel where that provides income. But don't do that. Go wood whittling or something. Eventually you'll get to the point where you feel like I feel like I've crossed the finish line, and I know there is a million miles more to go, but I can accept that I've crossed this line, and there's everything I've done thus far, and I can be proud of it. I can be happy of it, and maybe I don't need to push myself quite as hard as I did last year. But maybe next year I do. You have to be kind of open to all the possibilities, and just try not to burn yourself out. Is super hard. And then the other flip side of that is not being very careful about how you are presenting. Let's say you're at work and you're working on a side project. You need to be careful about, are you self-promoting or are you sharing, right? Are you it's so delicate, because it's a very quick way to annoy the shit out of everyone you work with, to just kind of constantly talk about yourself, but b, talk about what you're doing outside of work, and like very clearly like, see, yes, see. And I can't say I wasn't not doing that, for a while. I can't say that I wasn't, but I wasn't always doing that. And I think I had a very good balance. And I think if I had done that the wrong way, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job that I have now. So that goes kind of hand in hand, is like personal projects, knowing how and when to share those projects and keeping them healthy, right? Not doing what I did with the 1 month holiday project. Bad, very bad, right? And could have been could have been absolutely disastrous, for my health, personal life, professional life, But again, just tightrope, and it led to something, but I can't necessarily say it always does, right? Yeah, I hope that kind of covers some bases.
Yeah, no, I think it's the kind of the question I sort of ask a lot of people these days. I'm looking for a variety. It's like, well, how do you handle this? And how do you handle this? And I've got an approach I'm taking now of sort of time boxing a lot of things and actually putting on my calendar, this is the time I do my own stuff. And I'm only just starting to make that successful. So it's interesting to talk to different people about how they, balance these things or don't fail to, right? And so what does or does not work for different people. So that's cool. I appreciate that perspective. Hey, we've got some questions in the QA. So I will toss it back to you, Adrian.
How are you having? You're good with time, Grant? I got 2 more questions queued up.
Yeah, let's take those 2 for sure.
Jerome asks, for a soon to graduate game designer, is it more reasonable to expect to enter the industry via QA as opposed directly into a designer role?
Nobody is entering the industry, and no one is entering the industry in a designer role. Nobody's doing that. No one has ever done that. Well, I take that back. Probably some people did that in the 90s and maybe early 2000s. I don't know how anyone would enter. I honestly don't know how anyone would be able to swing that. You're going to have to enter in another department, and it might be, maybe it's environment, you're like an associate environment artist. Maybe you're, a game tester and you work your way up to QA analyst. Maybe you're in production, right? Maybe you are like an associate producer, or you're, you could even go from being an office administrator to a producer to something else. But, I went from QA to design, not because that's a natural path, but because I did some crazy stuff to get me there, right? And design requires a lot of things just to get in the door. It requires that you have experience. It requires that you have things that show that experience, and it requires that you can communicate about those experiences, and that it's a lot of communication. Like design is a lot of communication, in the same way QA is. So I think nowadays, QA is a path. It's one possible path, but I think that usually leads a little more to production. But the fact is, there really aren't a lot of paths that lead to design. I know designers that have a design position that have never designed anything in their off time. So they just knew a person, they started working there, they learned on the job or whatever, and that's enough. It's mind-blowing. I don't know. And these are a couple designers that I don't work with, but have worked on a lot of awesome stuff, and they're just like, wow, that's how you got here. That's a lot of work. It's just yeah, well, not all of us are just lucky, or I know a lot of game designers that started out in games press, right? That's one that you start in journalism, show that you know about games and can communicate about games, start writing about games. Game design is a lot of writing, as much as it is. And actually, I'm one of the few game designers I know that can draw, which is also wild. I can draw, I can storyboard, I can design characters. There's this concept, I think, that a lot of us at a certain age who grew up in video games in the 90s and early 2000s, that game designers were kind of this, every game designer was a Kojima, right? Clearly, every game designer working is a Kojima. They just spill forth creativity from every orifice, right? And that's not at all what happens. It's very much more like problem solving. But I mean, there is designers that do that. I'm one of those designers that kind of have that visual thematic element, right? Starting out, I went to school for animation, right? I went to school for animation. I have an animation degree. It took me a very long time to unlearn the behavior that I had learned in animation school, thinking that every designer was Tim Schafer, So early on, I came up with all these great game ideas and had no way to implement them, most game developers would say, start with a mechanic or start with a fun thing, build it out from there. And what I did was I'll make 5 pitch books. I'll make 5 game design document pitch books, and they're all kooky, sci-fi cooking game. How about a racing game with giant prehistoric birds instead of horses? What about, just very kooky stuff that was extremely hard to actually execute. That's where the rubber meets the road there. But that's the answer there. And how do I prepare for interviews? For Matthew's question, how do I prepare for interviews? I try to research the company, research the game. I started playing PUBG 2 weeks before I started at PUBG. Right? So that's fun, which is actually a very similar, I know a lot of people are in the same boat for other games, but research what you're looking into, try to learn as deeply as possible and see what value can you bring to their process? What values do you have innately that will improve what they're doing? Because that's basically at the end of the day, what they want to know is how can you help us, do the thing. And when I was interviewing for this, when I interviewed at PUBG for QA analyst job, I was very upfront with look, this is everything I can do. This is how I can help you. This is how I can help you guys in a year and a half from now. Here's how I can help you guys 3 months from now. So I kind of went into it, especially from the QA side. You can go into it from a QA design almost side where you're creating test maps. If you're fortunate to be in a very internal development space as a QA person, you have access to the editor or something, you can create test maps for the designers and the engineers. That is an extremely helpful way to do that. And I will shout out an excellent resource for not just QA, but the industry at large. Under the Underground QA podcast. It's a video and audio podcast on Spotify, YouTube. They have an excellent Discord community, Underground QA. They have videos on everything top to bottom in QA, getting into QA, growing in QA, and growing in the industry. All that stuff. I couldn't recommend it more. I may be a guest on one of their episodes, but I couldn't recommend it more because it is actually a great resource. And I've been a fan of them for probably 2 years now. But yeah, that's what I got.
Very nice. Cool. Jason had added on to the question about getting into a design role from another job, asking, would you say this is the case for the AAA industry? The indie scene can be a little more flexible depending on your experience.
Yeah, I'm a multidisciplinary. The value I bring to my team is that I am multidisciplinary in a lot of ways. So without getting into details, there's a lot of shoes to fill that you can kind of slip on and slip off. The flexibility, you need to be flexible and be able to kind of step up to the plate and say, I'm here to do whatever you guys need. Give it to me, right? That's music to, game dev leads' ears. Whether you can back up what you're saying, that's a different situation. But, specialization for certain things, if you're in the art department, specialization is necessary. If you're going into a design position or QA, you want to be multidisciplinary. You want your fingers in as many pies as possible because you don't know what is coming up. You need to be flexible. You need to be, the design and QA need to be the most flexible people in the department. It's everyone else that really needs to hyper focus on exactly what they're doing at that time, and just uh, on an art team, you have someone that does lighting. That's all they do, the lighting. It's a big job. It's a lot to work on. That requires specialization. Material creating and like model creating, prop making, a lot of time, requires a lot of specialization. Those are great examples. That's where specialization really matters. And as you grow in your career, you're going to gain specialization in whatever you've been working on previously. So you can carry that over. I worked at Epic and I worked on the Unreal Engine. And once in a couple weekends, I got to help out with Fortnite. That helped me get the job at PUBG. I wonder why. I don't think I need to connect those dots. But I think that is really think about what you want to do and think if specialization is the right choice for that, right? It's not necessarily yes or no. It really depends on what you want to do. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me out tonight, because it was I hope this was helpful. I always love chatting with you guys, so thank you so much.
I think it absolutely was. Thank you so much, Grant, for your time. Really appreciate you doing this and sharing your knowledge with us. That's really great. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.